Hey, and welcome to Get Found, our weekly web series on digital marketing, search, and all things interesting in the marketing space. I am joined today by Steve Farnsworth, who I will introduce in a minute. But today I want to talk a little bit about the problem with attribution models for content marketing, whether there actually is a problem, and all that fun stuff. So, according to CMI, Content Marketing Institute, proving ROI on content marketing efforts is becoming less of a challenge. I'm not actually sure I've heard anybody say that. I think what might be more accurate is that people are investing in content marketing. There's lots of metrics for content marketing, and that people believe that content marketing actually works. But I don't believe that assigning value and ROI to content and all things like that is any less challenging today than it was a year ago. So what does seem to be on the rise is attribution modeling and conversations around it. And attribution modeling, specifically multi-attribution modeling, simply put, is a way to assign credit to various marketing things for their role in creating conversions. And not all models are created equally or accurately. All right, so this week we're going to talk about some of the challenges associated with attribution models, and let's kick this thing off. So, Steve, 2-second introduction about who you are, why you're awesome, and your thoughts on attribution models, because you said you could tell us everything about attribution modeling in this 15-minute segment. So the floor is yours.
That I knew. Steve Farnsworth, I'm from the Steveology Group, and we do content marketing for high-tech B2B. And you can find me on Twitter at Steveology. One of the things in terms of attribution models, and all I meant by that comment is, everyone I've heard talk about this is a bane. I literally was at a table full of CMOs last Wednesday night, and we were talking about attribution models, and I said, I'd love to hear what you guys' thoughts are, and everybody's groaned because they're all just fighting with the same thing. So we had like first touch attribution models for a long time and last touch attribution models, and there's always, most companies who are able to track that are tracking kind of both, because there's always some set of people who have a dog in the fight for late stage stuff, and same is true for early stuff. And so nothing there. I think what we're seeing is just kind of a reality is people kind of moving into I think two kinds of attribution models and that need to happen. Is one, I think, is multi-touch attribution models, which make a lot of sense. I think there's some issues regarding about how you weight each of the interactions. And I think there's some good reasons for that. Also, time decay, multi-touch attribution models, I think, which is just where you're looking at, you look at the activities, but you weight the latest stage converting activity, the heaviest. And so I think there's a lot of use in there. The other one is, which is I think really good, is cohort attribution models, because you can look at cohort attribution models allow you, if you're looking at, let's say the item you were looking at is like when somebody signed up for your service in January, how many people maintained, who signed up in January, and then how many people signed up in February, kind of going down the list. But across is how many from month to month, how many of those people are retained. And that kind of analysis you can put to campaigns or kinds of other kinds of material that you want to measure. But what allows you to do, at least on that month one, it allows you to look at cost per closed lead. And cost per closed lead is huge. How much can you spend and still make money? So I think that's kind of where attribution models are. Cohort and multi-touch attribution and time decay is what everyone has to be doing. They may not be doing it yet, but I think that's fundamentally where that's the state of the art.
Yeah, so one of the things that's crazy with attribution modeling, right, is there are all of these different things, and everybody's doing them differently, and everybody's calling them different things. So like obviously first touch and last touch, these are actually two of my least favorite ways to do attribution modeling, only because it's so presumptuous in its nature of like what actually caused something, right? And some people say, well, like eventually it'll kind of all equal out because like some things will get, last touch when other things were part of it, but then the next time it'll be the other thing. But I'm like, that's wrong. So it's actually funny. So in Occam's Razor, Avinash points out kind of like what we first need to figure out is what somebody's talking about when they're talking about attribution modeling, because like often they actually don't know what they're referring to when they say attribution modeling. And I like the 3 categories that he breaks it out into, because then with each category, he goes into what types of models kind of are best for each, which I do believe, like, kind of a custom model is my favorite thing. But the first one is online to store. So this is kind of the attempt to try and understand the offline impact, like brand value, butts and seats, phone calls, things like that, driven by online marketing and advertising directly to a store. So this would be like online campaigns that actually get people to go to like a Sprint or, whatever store and actually sign up and activate a phone. Then there's across multiple screens. So this would be something like, TV, desktop, tablet, smartphone, like a lot of different things that you may see from different screens. And that is, obviously like a really complex situation. And then the last one would be across digital channels. So this is stuff where we're actually talking about like social, display, YouTube, referral, email, search, all these different things, right? So all of these are actually different types of attribution modeling. So like, are we talking about like online things to offline purchases, offline things to online purchases? Are we looking at like different screens that you may see? And are we looking at different digital channels? The first two are things that are probably not something really relevant to address in the show necessarily, and also are basically impossible, right? Like it's almost impossible, especially on an extended basis, to figure out everything that somebody would have seen across anything, right? Like that would be assuming that you could like big brotherly track somebody seeing a billboard, somebody seeing like somebody else's TV. Like if, you go over to somebody else's house for the Super Bowl and you're watching their TV and you watch commercials on their TV, like they don't know the difference between you and the actual person you hung out with. So that's a pain, right? What we're looking about now, what we're probably most looking at is across digital channels. So how do you assign real credit to each channel? One of the things that I've noticed, and I've had conversations with actual brands, is people are actually getting multiple credit, right? So like what they've adopted is a model where everybody who contributes along the conversion path gets credit, which means your total sum credit for a single customer or single, like let's say cohort, equals more than 100%, right? Because like a lot of people are taking credit for like a lot of percentages of conversions. What are you seeing kind of in terms of like when people are looking to assign credit, like too much credit being given, not enough credit being given?
So, well, it depends. So in a multi-touch attribution model, you tend to like, regardless of the number of touch points, they're not they're not necessarily predefined in terms of the percentage of the value that the total percentage of the value is divided up amongst all the points. The downside of that is you don't necessarily know which ones have the greatest impact. You can see where maybe one item tends to have a better attribution to it, but so that there's a thing called also position-based attribution model, which is probably makes the most sense for folks. It does have a problem, but it's basically kind of both time decay and multi-touch attribution model. And so you might get like the very first touch 40%, and in the last one 20%, and then divide the difference between the ones between. The only problem is you might be giving the very first touch way too much credit. So it may be a too high a credit. So it's always going to be a fight about how much credit do you give. I think probably kind of split completely equally probably doesn't make the most sense. Weighting it, front and back a little differently does make sense. So,
yeah, I mean, when we're looking at people getting credit for what they're doing on channels, I think that one of the reasons we're all having such a problem, and we talked about this last week with account-based marketing, which is we're all, instead of working together to say like, hey, we really care about, like what's going on with assigning or winning accounts as a whole, or like creating these things as a whole, what we're concerned with is, did I do a good job? Did my department get this? And can we have budget for next year to keep doing more of this? And like, how do I prove that, right? So I think that, if we were looking at it as more of an ecosystem, at which point like everyone can't survive without the other people. And like, even if like, let's say that for each customer, we do use this thing where it's like 40%, 16%, 12%, like 22%, whatever, right? And like get all these numbers together. Even if you said that like, okay, this channel only contributed 12%, if you take that 12% away, there's not a conversion, right? Because like you don't make it to 100%. So like you can't just say that just because something is contributing 12% that it's not important. So I think that that's where attribution modeling kind of hits some snags for me, right? It takes away the idea that even if something only contributes a little, that you still wouldn't have reached the goal line. You would have missed the goal by an inch. Miss it by an inch or miss it by a mile, you miss.
Yeah, and part of it, I think one of the things that you kind of floated when you first started talking about that is like people like really have different agendas in terms of first touch, last touch, often because it's a budget thing. They want either credit for the business or they want to fight for budget issues. And so they have a vested interest in looking at that data, and none of that data is probably why it's interesting to track. And I would ask those questions is not the data I would rely on in terms of attribution models. So I think that's a problem. I think one of the things that John Miller, co-founder of Marketo, he actually had an interesting take on the future of marketing, and I really agree. And like, Marketo is a marketing automation company, but what he talked about is that marketing people really should, a greater portion of their salary should be based on the business that's closed, that they should assume a much greater risk-reward place. The thinking is that not that you don't need salespeople, but if marketing help truly nurture that, and they are paid and rewarded on closed business, there's a big piece of their thing. Marketing has other things than just closed business it has to do, but closed business is a big part of their risk reward. That's where marketing should be. They're focused with their eyes on the prize. And I've always thought marketing should be about closing business, and I can't even believe that to say that. In the past has been kind of, well, there's so much marketing to do. Well, yeah, but we need to close in business is one of the first priorities in that line of stuff.
Well, so I guess that depends too on like what the organizational structure is as to how complicated a situation like that is, which is like if marketing was responsible for closed business, you probably would get everybody to be more on the same team, right? I mean, I guess maybe it could lead to even more fighting, but you'd hope that what it would do would really be to band everybody together and be like, we all win. Like we all sink or swim as a team here. The thing that I think is complicated there is it depends on whether you have something where people can do direct purchasing, right? So like, can you market to someone and then have somebody directly go in and purchase it? Like, okay, Coca-Cola did some marketing and advertising. I went into a 7-Eleven and bought a Coca-Cola versus like Oracle, where I saw some Oracle stuff. I knew I needed it. I compared and contrasted, but then I had to talk to a salesperson. I had to go through a process. I had to do all these things, right? So, I mean, there are some places where marketing could probably take credit or figure out a way to like be assigned specifically that. But then you're going to end up, I feel like, with a similar battle between what some people will say is marketing and some people would say is advertising, although I would like to just say that it's probably all one thing, because like now we have so much distinction between like paid and organic. Like, do we really need to call those things different things?
Well, I mean, I think that it does make sense. I mean, only because somebody has to be responsible, and I mean totally responsible for that piece, and so marketing qualified leads that marketing has decided are worthwhile to nurture and try to bring along and incentivize to engage and do that kind of stuff as an MQL, marketing qualified lead. And sales gets to decide what a sales qualified lead, a lead that they feel has a high likelihood of closing. And the only time I think there's a real issue is if everyone doesn't have the same conversation, agree to the same metrics. When does an MQL become an SQL, and when will sales openly accept it, and what will they do with that once they accept it? What will happen, and will it go back into the MQL pile if they don't close it? Do you have that process? I think if you actually have all the conversations, everybody gets to agree. It has to be universal. Everybody has to sit down and agree on the same metrics for what becomes an MQL to an SQL and what happens afterward. I think you avoid a lot of that confusion about, whose is it? Or, what is it? It now becomes like, we're really clear about when this is yours and when this is mine and what my responsibilities are.
So then is the advocacy for marketers to take ownership over not necessarily closed business, but over MQLs generated? Because I think a lot of people are already kind of doing that, right? I mean, I've listened to over the years a number of sales organizations and marketing organizations fight, fuss, and generally complain about each other. Sales always saying marketing didn't drive enough, marketing qualified leads, sales qualified leads, like they didn't do enough of their stuff, and marketing complaining that they were being held responsible for business closed and revenue, and that they handed off tons and tons of leads and that sales just didn't bother to close them.
So, so I think that I think that happens, but I think that that's it shows that there's a fundamental problem. And like, first of all, I think that marketing people should be held responsible for closed business, and I think that sales should be held responsible for doing a certain set of things on accepted SQLs. And the reality is that Brian Carden, who is the former CMO for Eloqua, when he would hand out leads, if they didn't call on him, he would take those leads and give them to one of the junior salespeople. And needless to say, the salespeople got really, well, those are my leads. Well, if you're not calling on them in the first 24 hours after I give them to you, you're not going to move on them. And I'm giving this guy who is going to move on them. So I think that you have to have that kind of stuff. And if really marketing's saying you're giving us crap, then they really haven't had an MQL, SQL conversation, because nothing should be getting to them that isn't ready to go and that everybody agrees on. So if it's getting over there, there's a breakdown in that process. And I would say that anybody who told me that, I'd say either you haven't done it or you haven't done it seriously, or marketing came up with all the specs and didn't ask sales to be a major part of that decision.
And I think too often that is the case, right? It's like this lack of time spent setting things up, spent digging in and figuring out what are the real parameters, what are we really looking for, and how do we know, right? And are these the right things? Because a lot of times you'll have things that marketing will do, which is like one of marketers' favorite things to do, which is like cohort analysis or targeted personas, or, all these different things where they're like, we have all these audience profiles. I'm like, did you vet these with sales? Like, did you actually ask who these people are? Or like, even better, not just with sales, but with whoever's doing customer retention and customer success. Like, what do successful customers in your organization look like? And how are you going to go after them? And what do those people look like, right? Because this to me is kind of one of the things that when we talked about account-based marketing is how you determine what those targeted accounts are even, right? Like, what does a successful account look like? How do you know the difference between people that tend to churn? Like, is it your failing, or is it that they're really just not a very good match for your organization? Are there specific characteristics of companies that tend to do really well? Are you looking at things geographically? Are you looking for certain team makeup? Like, all these things are really important when you're trying to determine what something looks like. But if you're not talking to the people who actually end up having to close the deal and have these conversations, and the people that actually have to be on the phone providing support after this customer is onboarded, then you're missing such a huge chunk that there's no way you can be doing it well.
Yeah, I think that the more sales is tied to the successes and failures of, the more that marketing is tied to sales and successes of sales, the better it's always going to be. I think one of the huge things that is coming down comes down with content marketing, and I think it's true with kind of the introduction of account-based marketing, is that you see that marketing should be involved in sales enablement, which is providing the kinds of content and the tools that help sales succeed most. And usually salespeople know what that is. Marketing can bring a lot, not only create new materials to help accentuate that, but also make sure those materials are available to other people and share successes, and also like to look at how do we continue bringing what we're doing right now and onboarding even. So even after somebody's become, you've done sales enablement, somebody becomes onboarded, are there things, using the same automated marketing, are there things we can be dripping out, working with the customer success people, articles about best practices, maybe send something the first day, 2 days later, and then every week for 6 months, whatever. There are all these things that marketing should be doing and should be responsible for. And I think that I've actually talked to a CMO just a few weeks ago who's had a bunch of folks who were only incentivized on basically creating MQLs fundamentally. It was actually a sales function, but they were actually to create MQLs, which then they can turn into SQLs. And if marketing actually came to them with a bunch of leads that they had generated from other marketing things, says, here are these leads and you followed up on. And this team wouldn't follow up on them because they were not incentivized on leads that they didn't generate directly themselves. And it's like those kinds of breakdowns just, and sales department had no interest in fixing that problem, which is ironic. So they had to give away the leads to partners instead of giving it to their own sales people to close. And so I think when you see those kind of problems, it really shows that there's a breakdown. Management's not talking to each other, not being tied together by the same goals and metrics.
And it's interesting that we see this so frequently, right? I mean, I'd like to say that what you just described is the first time I've ever heard anybody have that problem, but it's not. It's the 10 millionth time I've heard somebody have that problem. And it's why we got into this conversation during ABM, right? Which is like talking about like handing off the baton. And it's like the idea is there is no handoff, right? Like we're all kind of running with the baton together forever because like it's account-based marketing and you should technically always be involved with the account. Like you should continue to nurture these people and provide them information, and you should be able to continue to upsell, prevent churn. That involves sales, that involves marketing, that involves continuing education. The problem is somehow along the way we decided, and this is a systemic problem in upper management because that's where it starts, is that what we're going to do is we're going to pit departments against each other and we're going to make them fight it out. And this is the problem. This goes back to the, like at a granular level when we're talking about attribution modeling, because like this is like org level attribution modeling, right? Like not even channel related, it's just like org level attribution, is we've decided that channels and things should compete with each other as opposed to rewarding people for working together, which is in my mind the fundamental problem with attribution modeling, is that you're not doing the right thing with it, right? Like the idea of attribution modeling is not to say social did more than email and specifically Facebook did more than YouTube and Twitter, and like email gets this and then now like Facebook gets this. Like that's not the point of the attribution modeling idea. And if that's what you're using it for, you're being a jerk. The idea of the attribution model is you understand how things are working within the ecosystem, where it's most likely that like certain conversions are taking place for certain audiences, and then maximizing conversions based on the mix of those things and the types of target audiences you have, like leveraging messaging strategies and channels together across things. Same thing within your organization. Within your organization, the idea is not marketing did this, sales did this, customer success did this, and then like based on those things, somebody gets more money than somebody else. The idea is at what point does everybody play a certain role? How do we maximize each of those roles to close as many customers as possible and keep them here as long as we can, not to like assign blame and do things like that. And I think that's where it really came in, right? You have boards, you have like all different kinds of people. And at the end of the day, people don't make numbers or something doesn't go right and the blame game happens. And that's how we got to this kind of like super dysfunctional system.
Yeah, there's a lot of, for all those reasons, I think a lot of people are hesitant to put a stake in the sand because they're afraid they're going to be judged and found wanting. And it's really, we're in a, I sure get that. I totally understand that. Especially since historically kind of marketing, when it was a dark art, it's really hard to say, well, how many leads is PR going to close for me? It's like, well, but now we can actually, put a stake in the ground and even just measuring against ourselves. I think by and large, benchmarks are complete BS.
Thank you. I was about to say that.
Yeah. And so, but you can benchmark against yourself. You can say, here's what we're doing. We want to try to push these, we want to try to turn these dials. In the first place, you should always, there are other considerations sometimes, but once you know where all your leads are coming from and you've mapped that out, and it's shocking how many people don't have that already dialed in. It should be your number one priority. Where are leads coming from? What are they costing? What are they doing? What's going to happen to them if they don't close? And when you're doing that, you kind of start saying, where's the biggest thing, and can I turn that dial up? And that's really what you should be focused on. Turning the biggest dials up, and then looking to figure out which of those channels are working best and working together.
So true. People love benchmarking, like across all facets of life. People want to benchmark one relationship against another. They want to benchmark their weight. They want to benchmark their salary. They want to benchmark everything. They don't even want to just compare it to themselves. They want to compare it against everybody else that they know. I mean, it's kind of a dangerous game to play. And I think maybe benchmarking and some of the weird things with that would be a good conversation for the future. I do know that we're out of time for this week, but we will catch you guys again next week. It is Halloween, so happy Halloween. And I hope that everybody has a good day. Steve, thank you for joining, and I will see you next week.